with Claude Opus 4, the main point of it is its ability to handle not just complex tasks, long-running tasks.
Yeah.
Why is that necessary out in the marketplace? What was it that was being asked for by developers?
Well, we see that, people often have tasks that they want to do, and their tasks, at first they would trust the AI with short-lived things, like just change this file or just this, function within it. But when they started gaining trust, they want to be able to say, hey, I want you to be able to run this over, tens of minutes to hours. But then what you would find with previous models out in the market is that at some point they would lose coherence, so they would lose their path. And then all of a sudden you say, well, I can't trust it to do that. I'm going to have to stop and regain it. And so people want to be able to run a lot of these agentic tasks for longer and in parallel. And those were the things that we were really focusing on with Opus 4.
What was different in training Opus 4 to prior generation models?
When you think about how we manage like our own long context, we make to-do lists, we write our kind of tasks down. We try to give the models the same capabilities. One of the big pieces that we added was the ability of the model to use memory. And so over time, you'll see it actually write memory files, write to-do lists. It's actually quite endearing, I find it, and then update them over time as it's doing the work. And so that to-do list memory capability was one of the big new pieces of training that we did for Opus 4.
On the show very recently, the issue of AI memory in the context of agentic tools is very much a focus. Because it's not just one of the main things that people are talking about. There was a technical challenge to improve agentic tools.
Yes.
Do you feel like Opus 4 has kind of achieved that to a certain extent?
Yeah, absolutely. We really see this big delta. And, when I started a year ago at Anthropic, and we started thinking about memory, and we spun up a memory research team around it. And the real fruits of their labor are really Opus 4. And you can actually, it's very transparent how it does it. You see it write the memory file. So you can also introspect. I think the transparency is important too. What is it thinking about? How is it managing its state? What's it planning on doing next?
You're describing Sonnet 4 as a drop-in update for 3.7. What does that literally mean on a technical basis?
We really wanted it, day one, if you are existing, Sonnet 3.7 customer, and we have lots of them using, Cursor as a coding editor, different customers like that. They wanted to be able to move quickly. And so what that means, it's a couple of things. One, it's pricing, just matching the pricing that we have on Sonnet 3.7. The second one is making sure that the kinds of prompts or the kinds of instructions that worked for 3.7 work pretty well on Sonnet 4 with minimal modifications, because we don't want customers to have to go through weeks of sort of re-prompting it to figure out what those different pieces are. And then the last one is around latency and speed, just making sure that it matches the same sort of general class of latency as well. And it's really important for us that as we release new models, that as many people on day one are using them as well.
In my conversations with Anthropic and your colleagues, it's always been this heavy emphasis on building for the enterprise, rather than starting with a generative AI tool that is for the individual or the consumer. It's interesting, therefore, some of the case studies. Rakuten, for example. How might a Rakuten use Opus 4 or Sonnet 4, just in very real terms in running their business?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we often think about what are the internal use cases and external uses that we have. And often the external use cases tend to be the startups that are like rapidly scaling, and they're building on top of Sonnet, for example, and then be able to commercialize that. But I think the internal use cases are just as interesting. And those I kind of think in a couple of categories. One is, large, hard enterprise code-based problems. And they're not easily solved with just, a couple lines of code. I'm migrating from Java 7 to Java 8, and I need, the code, I need Opus to run for hours to be able to chew through that task, for example. So that's one way Rakuten is using Opus right now, is be able to do agentic work over their large code bases over hours, for example. And then there's the internal knowledge work use case as well. And so one of the ways in which internal and Anthropic we've been using the models is aggregating across all of our Slacks, all of our Google Docs, all the internal conversations, and be able to generate novel insights based on that.
There is a deep and probably slightly academic conversation we could have about how much internally you guys are willing to trust agentic tools to make autonomous decisions. But is the competence and utility of Opus 4 such that you'd feel like there is some value for how you use it, at least?
I've been using it as a sort of product, counterpart, or whenever I write a strategy document, I now give it to Opus.
It's a how much do you trust this technology question.
Yeah, and it's I think of it as a very useful thought partner right now. I don't think we're at the stage yet where it's going to be replacing the CPO, but it is definitely a very useful thought partner to the CPO. At least I'm finding it.
CPOs everywhere rejoice. They have a reprieve for now. It's become a bit of a sport tracking the release cadence and timing of frontier models, right? And it's one measure by which we judge Anthropic and its peers in their development success. Is this, in the case of Opus 4 and Sonnet 4, something truly available from the outset? Or much like Claude Code, do you have to do a sort of slow rollout to commercial partners?
Yeah, our only constraint for this launch was we want it to be available to as many people as want it on the launch day itself as well. And so it'll be generally available. It'll be in Cloud.ai for our more end users. It'll also be available in the API for usage on day one. And then as people scale up their usage, there's often capacity and rate limit conversations that we need to have just because the models aren't really in demand. But in terms of being generally available, it's day one.
Capacity and rate limit is a massive conversation right now. For me, a big piece of news in the last week was Grok 3 going to Azure Foundry. Is there any sort of technical or contractual reason why we don't see Opus 4 or Sonnet 4 be available in other places like that if the demand is there? For
us, a lot of it has been around focus on the chipsets that we really optimize for. And so, we've been really spending a lot of time on Trainium 2, for example, with AWS Bedrock, and on TPUs as well on Google Cloud Vertex. Yeah. And so that focus on that team has been really on those two chipsets. Over time, I can imagine us expanding that in other places as well.
I would wager that I'm one of the few journalists you speak to that spent time tearing apart a Trainium 2 server. A lot of fun can be had. But the next evolution of that is Project Rainier, right? So just for basic fact checking, Opus 4 was not trained with Project Rainier, but one would imagine on the inferencing side that is going to be a very critical piece of infrastructure.
Absolutely. And the way we plan to meet the customer demand for Opus and Sonnet in the coming months, a lot of that hinges on that cluster, on being able to scale up our Trainium inference. And that team has been hard at work on making sure these models work well on Trainium on launch day.
A lot of the Bloomberg Technology audience has a deep technical understanding of large language models and how they are built on top of or just used in their own right as tools, many of which you provide. It's an opportunity for you to explain to that audience how Opus 4 and Sonnet 4 compares benchmarking-wise to peers, and why you think that you've made actually some kind of substantive progress moving the technology forward.
Yeah, the way I look at it, there's two pieces. There's how we benchmark, and we're state of the art now with software engineering bench, with our terminal bench evaluations that we look at as well. And those are useful yardsticks, and you'll see us, state of the art across many of those. And then there is the use of data, like the daily use, and that's what I get very, very excited about. My favorite Slack channel inside of Anthropic is early access, which is where we're giving models to customers, end users, and API customers, and they're writing back and saying, oh, that thing I couldn't do before, I can now do with Opus. That thing that I could no longer do, I trust the model to do. And so the advancements, you'll see them in the numbers, and then hopefully you'll feel them as well in the usage.
Claude Code is probably a more important talking point than it's ever been, partly because there's a lot of movement in that space. I'm referencing Windsurf and OpenAI, but others as well. You're making it generally available. Basically, access has been limited, but there appears to be, you tell me right now, a massive pipeline of demand to have full access to Claude Code. And if you would, just give some granular detail on where that demand's coming from, what types of startups and enterprises that you're going to unleash it for.
We keep hearing this pattern where somebody will try Claude Code as an individual, get very excited about it, and then want to bring it into their business. And the way that we've made that possible is you can use Claude Code with your existing AWS Bedrock account, with your existing Vertex account, which, a thing I did not appreciate fully before starting Anthropic is how much goes into enterprise contracting, right? That can be a months-long process of getting security on board, legal on board, to be able to just flip on Claude Code because it's just part of your Bedrock experience is massive. And so we're seeing a lot of enterprise customers, the last thing that they wanted, like, can you also make it generally available so we can get full sign-off here as well, which is what we're doing with that. And then alongside, we're also releasing the ability to use Claude Code with GitHub, for example, with a GitHub action. Right. And the reason that's important, we think of it as our first virtual collaborator. You can delegate work to Claude, work autonomously with very minimal additional infrastructure needed. And I think that's exciting as well because Claude can do the work autonomously, but you need to give it the right harness, the right integrations, the right connections.